You are in for an interesting ride.
Hello and welcome to another ET Newsroom interview. Today I'm delighted to welcome on board Robert Salas, who some of you may know was a missile launch officer way back in 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base. There was an incredible event that took place. Now, he has really paved the way in creating a safe pathway for other military personnel to step forward and share their testimony. And in light of the creation of a new office in the US dedicated to looking into the UAP or UFO situation, Robert Salas, along with others, has already given testimony. He did that earlier this year, 2023, to the AARO team, and AARO stands for All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is headed up by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. So it will be interesting to see where these kind of testimonies and this information goes and what difference it makes. So we'll be having a fascinating chat and hear that amazing testimony once more. And just before we meet Robert Salas, I thought it would be interesting to have a bit of a context in which to hear about this gentleman's background. So this is his biography, and look forward to welcoming Robert Salas.
Robert Salas is a graduate of the US Air Force Academy, class of 1964. He served 7 years on active duty before separating from the Air Force in 1971. While on active duty, he worked as a weapons controller, flew target drones, commanded intercontinental ballistic missiles as a launch officer, and worked as an Air Force missile propulsion engineer on the Titan III program. From 1971 to 73, he worked as a safety and reliability engineer for Martin Marietta Aerospace and Rockwell International on space shuttle design proposals. From 1974 until his retirement in 1995, he worked for the Federal Aviation Administration as an aircraft structures certification engineer. From 1991 to 93, he served as an FAA attaché to the US Embassy in Indonesia, advising that government on aircraft certification. From 1998 to 2016, he worked as a mathematics teacher. In 2005, he published the book Faded Giant with co-author James Klotz, which details his UFO incident while stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 1967. In 2013, he published Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, providing new details on the phenomenon as a whole. On September 27, 2010, he co-sponsored a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where he and 6 other ex-military witnesses testified to the reality of the UFO incidents at US nuclear weapons bases. In May 2013, he participated in the Citizens' Hearing on Disclosure at the National Press Club, Washington, D.C., and in October 2021, he organised another press conference with 3 other ex-military witnesses on the connection between UAP and nuclear weapons incidents. Mr. Salas has spoken at international conferences in over 15 countries, including Norway, France, England, Ireland, Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, South Africa, Costa Rica, Peru, Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. He has been publicly speaking about his incident at UFO conferences, radio and television since 1996, and in early 2023 he gave his testimony to the newly formed body called AARO. AARO is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. AARO is an office within the United States Office of the Secretary of Defense that investigates unidentified flying objects, UAPs, UFOs, and other phenomena in the air, sea, and/or space, and/or on land. AARO was preceded by the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, UAPTF, a program within the Office of Naval Intelligence used to standardize collection and reporting of UFOs.
Get your seatbelts on, folks. You're in for a fascinating, maybe a fast ride. Bio, and now here is the gentleman himself, all the way from California. Aren't we the lucky ones? And not like the old UK, a bit miserable and raining here today. It's apparently absolutely gorgeous there. So I really wanted to kick off, and I know you will have done it uphill, down dale, Robert, but please could we go back to that incredible event in 1967, the 24th of March, and can you walk us through what happened there and how that changed perhaps your perceptions of life and anything else?
Of course, Joanna, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you. 1967, I was a missile launch officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, U.S. Air Force. We had about 150 missiles in the state, spread around the entire state. Where I was located on March the 24th of 67 was near a little town called Roy, Montana, which is about 100 miles to the east of Great Falls, Montana, and also the main base was at Great Falls. So we called our facilities launch control centers. We had about 15 of them throughout the state, and each launch control center had control of 10 nuclear missiles. These were Minuteman I ICBMs, capable of traveling thousands of miles to target. So on this night, very briefly state what happened. I was underground, 60 feet underground, part of a two-man team, but we had security guards upstairs, about 6 or so. The main security guard called me at one point and very frightened, very agitated, stated that he was looking at a glowing red object hovering above the front gate. It was a glowing red light. He could barely see inside the light a figure of oval-shaped object, but it was hovering there, pulsating orange-red light. Now, I had talked to him before about seeing something in the skies flying very strange that were not airplanes, but I didn't believe in UFOs at the time. I certainly did not consider this. I didn't even know what it was he was describing, other than the fact that he was very frightened. He had all the men had their weapons drawn, pointed at this object. He wanted me to tell him what to do next. And I basically told him to make sure the facility was secure, whatever happened. So essentially giving him the authority to fire on it if he felt threatened.
And what time of the day would this be, Robert?
Sometime in the evening, probably around, I would say 9. I'm just guessing because I don't really recall. I do know it was in the evening because of the sky was dark outside. We weren't able to see out. We had no video of the area at that time. I was 60 feet underground, locked in, couldn't go upstairs and take a look because of the security issue. So he hung up the phone. I woke up my commander, who was taking a rest break. And as I was about to tell him about the phone call, all our missiles shut down. So we lost all 10 of our missiles while this object was up there.
And Robert, can I just ask, was that a visual thing that you were observing, or was there an alarm going off, audio?
We get quite loud alarms go off if one of our missiles goes unlaunchable. So we had loud sounding alarms going off at the time, yeah.
Okay, and I guess then that's followed up with the visual.
Well, we have a command console, yes, on a command console, and we were able to read out a potential failure mode. Guidance and control system failure is what read out on each of the missiles. We lost all 10 within seconds of each other. So this object, whatever it was able to penetrate 60 feet of earth and concrete with signals to each of the missiles separately, because the missiles weren't interconnected in that way. Penetrate triply shielded cable, underground cable, to each of the missiles. The missiles themselves were located about a mile or so away, and upset a particular piece of hardware that controlled the guidance system of the missile. So that is the reason the missiles shut down, because their guidance system was upended.
In the context, this was quite a prickly time, wasn't it, in terms of what was going on with nations? So,
absolutely. In fact, in 1967, I've seen a graph that showed the total number of nuclear weapons in the world available was 37,000. 7,000 nuclear weapons held by the United States, Russia, and possibly other countries, but at that time. And my missile warhead was the equivalent of 800 kilotons of TNT. To put that in perspective, the nuclear weapons that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were around 20 kilotons of TNT.
that's just adios.
Yes. Now, after this, you asked me before what impact that this had on my life. Of course, after this, the next day, we were ordered not to disclose to anybody the incident or any details, or just talk to anyone about anything to do with it. In fact, I had to sign what's called a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, and I didn't talk about it for some 27 years after the event. And of course, I thought about it from time to time, thought about the impact, what it meant, and it changed my opinion of UFOs, certainly. But with time, I began to forget some of the details. So when I did think I was able to talk about it because of a book by one of your compatriots, Timothy Good, a book called Above Top Secret, on page 301 of that book, it states that missiles went down in Montana in 1967. And I happened to read that in 1994 when I picked up his book in a bookstore and just happened to turn to that page. Pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing. And I wanted to ask, Robert, talking about the impact, obviously, on psychologically, we're quite sensitive beings, really. How did this sort of recalibrate you as a person, or didn't it?
It certainly changed my thoughts and ideas about secrecy in government. Since that event, even while I was quiet about it, I began rethinking this whole concept of what the public should or should not know. Certainly, there are government secrets that should not be revealed to the public because they would damage our national security. No question about it. But in this case, we're talking about something out of this world, literally out of this world. I came to the conclusion quickly that we had no equipment, no aircraft that could do what this thing did, and therefore must have come from another world that we don't know about.
I was just going to say, so apart from being instructed never to speak about the event again, did it send you in a different or another direction as well with research or anything?
Yeah, spiritually, it made me think more about how would other beings be, morally, ideologically, what kind of values would they have, that sort of thing. So it kind of restructures that whole idea of who are we with respect to other living beings and with respect to other living things on Earth. So yeah, it did change my outlook on a lot of things, emotionally and spiritually, and committed. I became much more committed, revealing what the government knows. So that's what I'm working towards and have been since 1994.
What about your close people, your family, your friends? Certainly since you've been able to speak about it, had an impact on them?
Yes, my wife, of course. I never told my wife until 1994. And then she's had some, let's say, awakenings. Some things happened to both of us, actually. We both are experiencers.
Now, that's what I was going to ask next, actually, because often in the wake of these, if you like, expansive elements that sort of visit upon us, it seems to go with the territory that other things begin to, come into play. But things from the paranormal to, spiritual is just I don't mean necessarily religious either, but
yeah, it's I'll talk about my wife a little bit since she's not here. She can't stop me. So she did have a spiritual awakening, in fact, and has become a healer. She started with Reiki, and now she's well, it's a lot to go through, but she has had some abduction experiences, as I have, after this. And she does a lot of work with helping people, and we're more committed in many ways to helping the planet. So yeah, we've in that direction.
Yeah. On the abduction side, then, this is news to me. I didn't know that things had gone in that direction for you as well.
Quickly, it's in my book. My last book is called Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, and I describe it in there. I went public with this in 2013, so it's been about 10 years. So 1985, my wife and I and two small children were in a home in Manhattan Beach, California. I remember the home exactly because I was remodeling houses and selling, remodeling, selling, that sort of thing. And during the evening hours, I woke up suddenly and saw blue light coming from the living room. We didn't have any blue lights. Tried to get up. I woke my wife up. I said, "Do you see the blue lights?" She said, "Yeah." Tried to get up to investigate, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Turned to my wife. She's unconscious now. Remember, we have two small children in the house, and normally she would have gone back to sleep. But I couldn't wake her, and then all of a sudden I see a image in the doorway. Can't make out the face, but it had a hood on. Looked like a person, but I couldn't make out the face. Next, I'm aware of some small beings, almost reminded me of children in the room. Then I'm being lifted off the bed, carried towards the window. The window was locked. They took me right through the window. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what happened. And then next time up on board a craft on a table, I'm being shown a needle, and they're placing it right in front of my this being, whatever it is, and I remember it was not human because of the long, bony fingers, very long, holding the needle and placing it in front of my eyes and saying, "We're going to insert this in your groin area and it won't hurt." But when they started to insert it, it was very painful. I told them that telepathically, very painful, and the pain went away almost immediately. So I assume they took samples of sperm. I don't know, but that's what I'm assuming. Then that was about it. They took me to another place and checked my spine, poked two fingers down my spine, and then two of them escorted me out through a curved hallway. And then there was a flash, and I was back in my bed. I did not remember any of this the next day. And then 27 years later, another 27 years, I was in Ireland, matter of fact, at a conference, and the woman speaking experience was also an experiencer, and she mentioned a blue light in her bedroom. I turned to my wife and I said, "Do you remember a blue light coming into her bedroom?" And she said, "Yes." And my wife does not lie about such things. And so from there, I got regression hypnosis. I've had 4 regression sessions, and that's how I remember now what I just told you. Again, maybe I should go back and get regressed, but I do not recall what they look like, other than they were small, like children, like I said, and more than likely the typical gray. What I do recall vividly is the long, bony fingers. And there's another story associated with that, but we won't have time to go into that now.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's really extraordinary. You know, a lot of people have experienced healing, not only healing for themselves, but also an ability to be more compassionate, for want of a better term, in life because of these experiences. I'm not quite sure what mechanism is at play there, but it's a sort of expansion of the mind and the heart. working with Bill Brooks and getting his story down, he was a person who was not only a non-believer in anything, spiritual, God, ET, UFOs, paranormal, anything. So at 44, when he had his head literally cracked open with a whole download event, he'd remembered nothing as a lifelong experiencer up until the age of 44. He absolutely became a different person. I didn't know him before then, but he described himself, and he was an army as well. You had to hit him hard, get a kind of psychological hammer out to make an impact. Bless him. But he said also he was sure that once he knew, he was awake and aware to the fact that this was a reality and had been happening, that they wouldn't do it again. Now he was, in the know. He said how wrong I was.
I think once people have had these experiences, they are visited multiple times throughout their lives.
And he was also taken through a combination of the brick of the wall and then the window. He was able to observe himself going through it in full consciousness. But
right.
And he was, again, he would just say, I know people think I'm nuts, think it's ridiculous. And probably I wouldn't believe anybody else if they told me that this happened to them. He said, but it happened to me. And that's what I know. I think it would be lovely now to just talk about the other cases now, going back to your Oscar flight. We've talked about that and how you were shut down and all the base was shut down from speaking about it.
Let's talk about Echo Flight. Echo Flight was happened March 16th, 8 days before my flight. Very same situation, other than the fact that the UFOs were above the launch facilities where the missiles were located. UFOs were seen by security guards and maintenance people. And that's how that flight started to go down. Again, all 10 missiles. There was a November flight in Minot, North Dakota in 1966, around September of 1966, that went down. All 10 missiles were lost, and that witness, David Shindelli, I'm happy to announce that he will be speaking to the AARO organization, the government organization that is the focal point of the UFO study at this point, and he will be giving his testimony early May. So again, within 6 months, from September of 66 through March of 67, 30 nuclear weapons missiles were disabled by UFOs.
I also wonder, because I have heard that some missiles have been actually put on alert.
Around 1982 in Ukraine, it was a Russian missile, and a UFO was observed over the launch facility of the Russian missile as the missile started to go into a countdown for launch. This was nothing that the Russian controllers did. The missile just automatically, for some reason, began a launch sequence, tried everything to stop it, and just before it launched, it shut down. It stopped while this object was overhead. This has been documented many times. Sorry, I don't remember the name of the individuals involved, but it is documented.
That's really extraordinary too. And I think also the fact that right on March 24th, in the very near area called Belt, there was this incredible sighting. Now, I'm not quite sure what time of day it was, or if it was evening, that a civilian, a truck driver, actually had an up close and, well, reasonably personal experience of actually not only seeing a craft, but watching it land.
Yes, that's a very important incident. So on the same evening as my incident, March 24th, this truck driver was driving through the town of Belt, Montana, located about 35 miles to the southeast of Great Falls, when he saw this glowing light pacing him. It was just above him. I think he said it was about 200 feet above him, but it was traveling the same speed as he was. So he slams on his brakes, gets out of his truck, watches this object. The object actually blinked at him. In other words, the light did a blink and then landed in a gully. So the truck driver goes and stops a motorist and asks the motorist to call the highway patrol. The highway patrol comes out just as the object is rising above this gully and takes off. And then it comes back later on. They call the Air Force, the highway patrol calls the Air Force. The object comes back and lands again in the gully. The Air Force comes out and they're going to send helicopters down into the gully, but decided it's so dark. By the way, this whole sequence started about 9 p.m. Could have been close to the time of my incident, but anyway.
Do you think it might have been the same craft there, Robert? Or
Hard to say.
Yeah.
There were UFOs seen throughout the state of Montana on March 24th. But the point I try to make is this man called Lieutenant Robert Jameson was a targeting officer who was called around 10 in the evening, 10:30, and told to come to the maintenance hangar. They had an assignment for him, and as he got there, he was told that all of our Oscar flight, had shut down. So he's my primary confirming witness, other than my commander and myself.
Did you ever receive a report of any kind on this thing? The only thing I ever heard back, and never anything in writing, was that Boeing or whoever determined it was some kind of, it could only have been duplicated with some kind of very intense square wave generator, and that there was something that the launch crews could have done to approximate that. Yeah, I know about it. I said, bye-bye, let me out of here. Everybody hushed it up, and somebody had said they had classified it, whatever it is. It was classified, it was. But through our efforts in the FOIA, it's declassified now. Did you get any written reports on it? I got you a report of the unit history that talks about it. But I know I had very, very detailed logs that I had written that night. Do you still have them? I don't know. That's interesting. The question that is all enough that I know that I had written many pages, so I can remember lots of pages, because I was the deputy, and I was logging every call and everybody's name and who did what and who when. I'm one of those meticulous individuals. I had logged everything. I don't know if I got the Xerox copy done before we turned them over or not. My mind is kind of foggy. I'm 30 years along. Fantastic. I mean, if you have something on that incident, I'd really appreciate knowing, because this would be pretty significant. I mean, if we had 2 flights go down of 10, and there were other missiles go down in 1 flight, is significant. Yeah, and let's face it, the failure rate was nowhere, was minuscule compared to that. That's right. And then UFO sightings at the same time. I had them hovering over the site, because I said, right, come on, I'm not a believer in that crap. And that was reported on the secure line. Mm-hmm. And I told those guys to make no transmissions, and then when the strike team got out there, they were on VHF back in the day. Very clearly that happening. Do you believe them? Well, let's see. I say I believe them, they sound crazy. If I say I don't believe them, I know there's a plausible explanation for shutdown of 10 out of 10 missiles. It's not going to happen. The statistical probability of that is just about equal to me winning the lottery tomorrow morning. Right. One time in all of Minuteman history, on 1 flight of 10 missiles, how many nights, if you start multiplying how many flight nights there were, Right. I mean, it's got to be thousands and thousands. Well, what if 2 sites went down the same night too? That would be even more fantastic. And that's what did happen. From my recollection, all our missiles went down also. And I clearly remember my MCC calling yours or you, right, which, and verifying that the same thing had happened at your flight. And I have no idea where Eric Carlson is. Was he interested in psychology or anything? Because this guy, I really don't remember. This guy's a counselor. So, I don't know. Could be. But you say my world is in Alexandria, as far as you know. I think so. I haven't talked to Fred in many, many years. I don't even remember. People you meet in a meeting or at luncheons and whatever. Yeah. That'd be fantastic. Looking forward to reading that. You sent me some junk, huh? Yeah. Good. All right, well. Okay, that'd be fantastic. Nice and classified. And you got all the files from that, huh? Well, I got what they were able to give us, what they released. And basically, we got unit histories for the whole year from 67, and they were trying to figure out what happened to Echo all that time, and never came up with a definitive resolution. They did talk about EMP, electromagnetic pulse waves, right? As possible, but they couldn't figure out how the EMP got into the SIN lines. Yeah, I wouldn't know either. Yeah. Okay. None of us walk around with big generators, right? All right. It would take a healthy signal. That's all I understood about it. Some kind of square wave. Yeah. I don't want to know anymore. At that time, I was in. I didn't want to know any more about it. Okay. Don't tell me anything I don't need to know. Well, I'd appreciate if you could find those, look for those files, and I will. And then maybe write back to me and tell me what you found. Sure. Gladly. Okay. Thank you, Walt. Okay. Talk to you. Bye bye. Because they were doing maintenance on, I don't know, guidance cans or something, and the maintenance crews were staying over, and there were security and maintenance on site on both on two of the 10 sites. And when the first one went down, I talked to the security out there. They had reported this UFO hovering over the site. I said, "Yeah, right. What are you guys drinking out there?" And we struck strike teams to both the sites that had been occupied. And with both strike teams, I didn't tell them what we had heard. They only via the LF radio. And I told them to go to get within a mile of the site and call back in on the PHF. And they both had reported it too. So we had two maintenance crews, two security troops on site, and two strike teams all reporting it. Is that right? Yep. Do you remember any of the names of any of those guys? Nope. You don't? Long ago. Long ago.
That confirmed that Oscar flight, all of Oscar flight shut down on March 24th. But he was told that they cannot leave the hangar until this belt sighting situation is cleared up. There was UFO activity all over Montana. So that's why it's an important incident as far as I'm concerned.
Was the location, the gully where it landed, was that very far from where the truck driver had seen it?
Right there, right near
right.
Belt. Near Belt, Montana. Yeah.
Yes.
And so were a lot of civilian witnesses. And UFOs were seen by radar, FAA radar, over the base also, the Malmstrom Air Force Base. So this was written up in the local newspapers. We have copies of newspaper reports. So I feel my incident and the Echo incident are very well documented.
It just goes, we were saying earlier on, that it seems that from 1945, since the testing of atomic and nuclear weaponry, that's really got the attention of these other intelligences, wherever and whoever they may be. Yeah.
I mean, right now, after the SALT II treaty, we were limited to 1,500 each. I'm talking about the U.S. and Russia each. We're limited to 1,500 active nuclear or operational nuclear weapons. Of course, now that treaty is kaput with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Russia has withdrawn from that treaty. So who knows how much of a stockpile they have and how much of a threat that will be in the future. I'm fine. I'm ready to go.
Okay, that's great. That's something of the photographs and the illustrations. If I can put them into this video for illustration purposes as well, that would be great.
Well, you have my permission.
Reports from the field about UFOs. I remember the two guards that had gone out to one of the sites. She finally got back scared to death. We had to relieve them of duty. Oh, you mean our guards? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, broken control type. One of the sites, the LF, on the way back, we lost radio contact, and we ended up having to send them back to base earlier. Not sure what happened. I don't think they ever returned to guard duty. And what were they scared about? Well, they had seen some crazy things. And they did? Yeah. They reported that to you? They reported it to the topside guy. Oh, the topside guy. That's right. Okay. Well, interesting, don't you think? Yeah.
folks. Well, against all the odds, we're back. We had a bit of trouble getting on here, but I have Mr. Robert Salas with me again. I can't wait to hear the next segment. So, Robert, I really wanted to know if you had a take on Thomas Mantell, 1948, in regard of UFOs and engagement.
Yeah, the Thomas Mantell case is very interesting. Of course, he was leading a flight aircraft. Actually, I think the UFO was seen on radar, southern part of the United States. And radar picked up this UFO, and Thomas Mantell decided to chase this object. It was going very fast. Mantell said he was going to try to stick with it, and the rest of the flight returned to the base to land, but he kept going. At some point, I believe his plane crashed, and so it's an unsolved mystery. Now, I seem to remember that in 1952 there was a lot of UFOs seen over Washington, D.C. During that incident, of course, we scrambled aircraft against the UFOs. There is one statement that I recall in reading from this book on where the commander of a flight said that one of his aircraft was lost in chasing this UFO. So whether it disappeared or whether it crashed for some reason, I don't recall. But that reminded me of that.
And we also had the 1942 incident, didn't we? And of course, that was still when everything was very hot in terms of war. Yes. Indeed, the Battle of LA.
Yeah, that happened, I think, February of 1942. This blimp-like object was seen over Los Angeles, hovering over started in Santa Monica, I think, and then flew towards Los Angeles and above, and the Army got out their anti-aircraft weapons and shot cannon at him, shells at this object, and to no effect. Eventually, the object just flew off, but it was above the Los Angeles area for something like 3 hours, as I recall. It was kind of hushed up for some reason.
I remember William Tompkins. He was an amazing person who a lot to do with exotic flight. And I think he was only about 11 at the time, but he remembered the 1942 incident. So a lot's gone on, hasn't it, really? There's no way there's not UFO activity. Yeah. So I'd love for that to just take us into the press club event of 2021, when you and some very brave colleagues made a presentation. And I think some of your colleagues at the press conference, I think you cited even more than we've spoken of as yet.
Yes, remember October. If you go to my YouTube channel, Bob Salas YouTube channel, your audience can see the entire 2-hour presentation of that. We held a press conference at the National Press Club, myself, Dave Schindele, Robert Jameson in person, and then we had Robert Jacobs come in on a connection, and he talked about his 1964 incident. Well, we started off with 1945. There were Navy pilots that were scrambled over the facility in Washington State, Hanford nuclear facility that was producing plutonium for the first atomic bombs. And UFOs this happened at least twice, where Navy aircraft were scrambled. Of course, they couldn't catch the craft, but it was seen on radar and visually. And then we also talked about, like I said, Robert Jacobs' case over the Western Test Range over the Pacific Ocean, where Atlas missile, the nose cone, was filmed, where a UFO flew literally circles around the nose cone, hitting it with what looked like a laser weapon and deflecting the path of the nose cone. That's fantastic. And that was confirmed by his supervisor. Then we talked about my cases, Schindele's case at Minot Air Force Base. And then there was another one, very interesting one, in 1968, Minot Air Force Base again. B-52 pilot Bradford Runyon was a co-pilot. He was testified that this object, which harassed them in flight, and then later landed right next to a launch facility, again, a missile launch facility. When they landed, they got a briefing from the commanding general who said that the surrounding fence surrounding the launch facility had been crushed, and that the actual cover for the launcher where the missile was located, which weighs 20 tons, was simply lifted and put aside by this object. Amazing.
Was that actually witnessed, do you know, Robert, the levitation of that?
I'm not sure about whether it was witnessed, but it was stated by this general officer to the crew. The cover, missile launch cover, was to the side. The only way we removed that cover during an actual launch would be through railing. It was almost like a motorized railing process where the missile would, the cover would roll down this rail. Or if that didn't work, we had explosive bolts that would blow it off. But again, this was a pretty amazing feat for this object to have. That's the only way the cover would be placed to the side like it was. Now, the security guards that were out there did see this object in the area at the time. So,
and did they witness anything coming or emanating from the craft itself?
That I don't know about this. Other incidents, there have been many cases of UFOs flying over nuclear facilities and simply shining a beam of light on the location of the weapons themselves. Again, basically warning us about these nuclear weapons. We really, in my opinion, all these incidents were simply a message that we ought to abolish all nuclear weapons. But you know, it's important that any story that's being told or by other people, other individuals that have not been validated, other witnesses or other documentations.
So I think this all would take us on to the Condon report and your opinion.
Yes, I've researched and even reported when I gave my presentation to the AARO committee. I reported how the Condon investigation, so-called scientific investigation, which even Condon admitted was not a scientific investigation. I have plenty of documentation showing the entire cover-up, including a tape the Condon investigator and the base operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Chase at Malmstrom Air Force Base, who denied knowing about the missile shutdowns at Echo and Oscar, even though, as I mentioned, the entire base knew about it, and he is the base operations officer.
Yeah, he was talking to Roy Craig.
Roy Craig, that's correct. Roy Craig, yes. So I've written extensive reports on this. The Condon Committee was a whitewash, pre-planned to be a whitewash of the UFO phenomenon at Air Force bases.
The following interview, conducted by Roy Craig, is with Lieutenant Colonel Louis D. Chase, who is Chief of the Operations Division at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. The interview is being conducted at Malmstrom on October 19th, 1967. The first part of the interview will concern an experience with which Mr. Chase had when he was pilot of a B-47 on a mission out of Forbes Air Force Base on 18th of September, 1957.
I'll tell the sheriff. Well, the sheriff got on his network, and I guess they had a highway patrol car in the area. This is the way I remember it. And Mr. Nader reported upon reaching the scene, he observed an unusual light emanating from the area that the truck driver claimed the object had landed the second time. This thing had landed, according to the truck driver, in this deep gully right adjacent to the highway. But then he parked this big trailer that he was talking and run back towards the area, and he said that the thing lifted up and went into the ravine. There's sort of a hogback that goes across this thing and lifted over and set down on the other side. Well, reportedly, this is where it was at when the highway patrolman, this Bud Nader, arrived. said, yes, very definitely there was as it says in the report here. At 12:30, I left the base for the area with my chief of the helicopter section here, because the sheriff had asked me for helicopter support to search the area because of the roughness of it, and they had asked if we would put out some troops to sweep through this ravine that night. So I went out and looked at the area, the gully area. By this time, there's no sign of anything. However, the sheriff has posted a continuous watch on the area, and there's a lot of curiosity seekers that are out there. By this time, the news has got on the radio. So I looked at the area, and I said, no, we won't send any troops down through there tonight because it's too rough a country. So sheriff and I talked about it, and I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. Right at the crack of daylight, our helicopters are not equipped for night flying. They don't have the equipment necessary to fly at night. I said, right at the crack of daylight, I'll launch a helicopter out there and make a sweep of the area. And the sheriff says, okay. You make a helicopter search in the morning, and we'll send 2 or 3 of our types down through there tonight to see what we can come up. So they made a search about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then about 5 o'clock in the morning, I put a helicopter to look over all of these ravines. And that's when I sent you the negative report then, that there was, we didn't find anything the next morning.
Now, when did the patrolman quit looking? He observed this, and then did it disappear, or did he go check it out?
I don't know. Sometime between the time the patrolman arrived, of course he couldn't go in there, into this gully at night, at least not by himself. And sometime between then and the time I arrived on the scene, the sheriff took over the monitoring of the area. In fact, Sinker himself was the man that was there. As I say, he's kind of a project officer for Sheriff Pitzel on this. But we sent you...
now, right about that same time, we heard rumbles from other areas that something happened here on the base related to the failure of a flight of Minutemen. It was just about the 24th of March. Has this any connection with the UFO business? The rumor mill has that there was a UFO sighted by one of the SAC maintenance crew who went out to check out why the flight had lost power.
As far as the status of the missile sites is concerned here, I can't discuss with Dr. Craig because what is on alert, what is not, for all periods of time, I'm going to refer you to other people on it. All I can tell you is at the time that we had the reported landing, the whole area here, we had lots of reports on it. But I'm not privy to knowledge of what the status of the missile sites are. You can see this, of necessity, must be classified. And I'm not privy to this type of knowledge.
I think the comment that came to us was that some of the maintenance crew who had to check out sites that had lost power unexplained had said they saw a white light come down and circle the base in broad daylight or something like this, and then this was denied the next day after it had been, and then a big hush-up sort of thing. You're not aware of anything of this sort?
No, this I'm not, because I wouldn't know what the status of the missiles were. It's common for us to have a commercial power failure or something like this. This happens repeatedly, such as commercial power does anyway. And I just have a suspicion that some of the commercial power people there happened to be a power outage someplace, and they tried to tie the two of them together. But this, I wouldn't know. But I would suspect this is a real strong possibility.
I would immediately conclude this, but I thought I would check it out while I see if you had any information on it, or
well, I think
who is this man in charge of SAC maintenance or research?
And I've got evidence to prove that. Basically, the Air Force wanted to present something to the public stating that there was nothing there to really look at for the Air Force, and they were no longer going to investigate UFOs as a result, which they issued in an official public statement in 1969. And one of the things they quoted was the Condon investigation, which, again, like I said, was a cover-up operation. It was a whitewash. So to this day, the United States Air Force has not commented, acknowledged either any of the missile shutdown incidents that I've mentioned. And they've got a lot of explaining to do because, again, I have multiple witnesses, a lot of evidence, all of this evidence and witness testimony confirm that those incidents did happen, And the Air Force refuses to comment about it to this day, even though I've given an official report to the AARO committee.
Yes, that is interesting. And did you give your testimony directly to him, or was it
two individuals that were working for him? But it was that same group, the AARO group. AARO stands for All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office.
I have a hard time remembering it. It doesn't sort of flow.
The reason they call it all domain is because remember the one of the first videos that were released by the U.S. Navy showed the object maneuvering underwater. And again, many experiencers talk about traveling in the ocean underwater to underwater bases.
I mean, there's just so much. I mean, I listened to the hearing with Dr. Kirkpatrick. That honestly came away wondering what that was all about, apart from the warmongering and the threat. Now, I do understand if your capabilities of defending yourself are compromised and you have foreign flights over, your airspace, but it's not over anybody's over the world's airspace, that you can't stop. Clearly, they're aware that this has been going on for a long time, but now they're ramping up the speak about, the threat. What's your opinion?
Well, I thought it was a very fine tap dance that Fitzpatrick did, and in collusion with the senators, I must say. Senator Gillibrand knows very well about my incident because I've sent her documents and reports for literally years. So does the Department of Defense, because I've sent them reports. And yet, this Mr. Kirkpatrick, who, by the way, is very steeped in intelligence agencies. I think he spent 30 years in various intelligence agencies like the CIA, NSA, the DIA. Yes. And so he's very well versed in reporting. When these gentlemen have to report to the Congress on intelligence operations, they are very well versed on how to speak to those people in Congress. And so this was an evasion. I thought the whole thing was just a farce, evasion of getting to the facts. So the basic questions, of course, is there a possibility this is extraterrestrial craft? Now, all they have to do is validate through their various agencies whether or not any other nation has objects that can operate and perform as these objects have been observed to do. It should be a fairly simple matter to come to any conclusion about that. And if they don't have these objects, then they must come from off planet. It's a very simple calculation. And they refuse to tell the American public or the public in general that simple statement.
What's your opinion of the Bob Dean, the Robert O. Dean testimony about when he was in SHAPE, the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Headquarters in Europe, back in the 60s, when he was given eyes on a document called the assessment, which was looking at these craft that they had sighted coming over, sensitive airspace, and one party's thinking it was another. And then, so this report was the result of that. And he stated in his whistleblowing testimony that they were not a threat.
Well, I think Mr. Dean, who I think is deceased now, was very credible. Like you say, he was one of the top non-commissioned officers in SHAPE, and a very credible individual. I've met him. So I believe what he was saying. And coming to the conclusion that these are not a threat is a judgment that I think has been made many times, starting with Blue Book. Except in Blue Book, there was a report written in 1948 called The Estimate of the Situation, where Blue Book reported that these were indeed extraterrestrial craft. I guess threat is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? And really, that kind of a judgment ought to be left up to the public. Let's get all the facts out on the table and let's all decide what's a threat. What it is a threat to is people in government who want to hold on to power. The people that are holding these secrets are those kind of people. And these secrets are not only valuable monetarily because Obviously, they can be converted into, the information can be converted into actual hardware that can be produced by manufacturers and sold as weaponry, or something that could be used to develop weaponry. And that's being done. There also could be, these secrets could also be used as bartering chips with other intelligence agencies in foreign countries. In other words, you tell me your secret, I'll tell you mine. That sort of thing, which gives people power. So there's this greed element, the element, power element.
If most of the population knew for a fact the reality, in my opinion, that of the reality of these other intelligences, most of the people I've spoken to, even who have experienced, let's call it trauma from the abduction process, ultimately, maybe years down the line, they've actually admitted to it being an incredible experience in terms of them growing and evolving as a human being and as a person, because we have no frame of reference for this. We're not taught anything at all, which is why I do what I do, speaking to people, because it's just trying to bring this a little bit more into the arena. It is quite difficult to prove, as Bill Brooks has said in his story. He can prove he was a musician, prove he was in the army, but he can't prove he's an abductee, except his mind and life changed immeasurably.
No, I agree. As far as proof goes, again, I'll go back to AARO. The Kirkpatrick said at one point that, I'm a scientist. I want scientific process to work here, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, people's testimony, if multiple people are saying the same thing, that is data. That is data, which is science is, we'll call it observational data. And one of the entry points to doing science is observation. Something in the microscope, and you catalog it, you watch it, you see what it does. That sort of thing is science. And so he should not dismiss testimonies so blithely as saying this is kind of secondary information. I don't know what he said exactly.
Do you know what their budget's going to be?
No, I don't.
Well, look, I know you said you're now ready to get the fight. Thinking that you might have just put your hat on the hook there and thought, no, I'm going to put my feet up. Do you think it was AARO's attitude giving you that impulse again?
I was hoping that AARO would be an honest broker, let's say, between the public and the intelligence community. But after having talked to them, spoken to their people individually, and by the way, I have a tape recording of the entire presentation, including their questions and answers. And at some point, I'm going to release parts of that. What I came away with was that they couldn't or wouldn't be able to validate what I told them because of basically lack of cooperation from other agencies. So
here we go again.
Here we go again. It's just another way of covering up and not being able to do anything about it. So that's what got my blood boiling again. And I had earlier decided not to do any more podcasts or presentations at conferences because I had felt, I'd been doing this for almost 30 years now. And I've done my bit. But to quote, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yay! Well, good for you.
Boy, I'm going back into the fight, and so you'll probably see me at other conferences in the future. And
I think Bob Dean did something similar. I think he kind of threw in the towel for a while and thought, to hell with it. And then I think his family said, "What are you doing? Get back out there. You need to speak about this stuff." Another extraordinary story, and delighted that you are throwing your hat back in the ring. And if there's anything I can do to help or support you, please let me know. And it would be great if ever you want to get a few of you guys together and have a platform and have an hour or two doing a roundtable where you can speak your mind and then we can get it out there. I'll happily host that. Thank you very much. It's been absolutely lovely, Robert, and I'm so delighted that you finally agreed.
Thank you, Joanna. It's been a pleasure, real pleasure.